The silence in the brownstone on Marlborough Street was heavier than the snow piling up outside. I had spent 3 years helping Julian study for his Series 7, editing his pitch decks, and proofreading his quarterly reports. I even used the last of my grandmother's inheritance, the money she'd specifically told me to use for my own law degree, to pay for his first networking wardrobe. I told myself it was an investment in us. Last night, Julian had come home late. He smelled like Charlotte Sterling's perfume, that cloying, expensive scent of white roses and old money. He didn't kiss me. He hadn't kissed me in months. Instead, he tossed his keys onto the marble island I'd spent a weekend refinishing and said, "We need to talk." I looked up from the soup I was stirring. Talk about what, Jules? The fact that you haven't touched me in 112 days. Or the fact that your name was in the Globe today next to Charlotte Sterling's at the Symphony Gala. He flinched. He always hated it when I was precise. He preferred vagueness. It allowed him to lie. Charlotte is a colleague. Lena, she's opening doors for me that you can't even comprehend. Doors that require a certain image. Image? I set the spoon down. My hands were shaking, but my voice was steady. Is that what I am now? An image problem? You're from Southie, he said, the words hitting me like shards of ice. You talk like it. You dress like you're still shopping at Goodwill. Charlotte understands what it means to be a Vance. She understands legacy. Legacy? I laughed, but it sounded hollow. Julian, your father lived in a trailer park in Lowell. I'm the one who found the archival records that proved your great-grandfather wasn't a shipping magnate, but a dock worker. I built your legacy with my bare hands while you were busy pretending you didn't know me at the firm's Christmas party. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration he'd adopted since he started making 7 figures. You're being dramatic. I'm moving out. Charlotte has offered me a place at her Beacon Hill estate. It's temporary, just until the merger is finalized and the partners see me as a stable, established figure. Temporary? I walked over to him. I wanted to scream, to throw the soup pot at his head, but I just felt empty. You're leaving me for her, and you want me to believe it's just for a merger. I need you to understand. Lena, I've outgrown us. I've outgrown you. Charlotte sees my potential. She doesn't look at me like I'm some charity case she's propping up. He reached for my hand, and I let him, too stunned to pull away. I'll have the movers come for my things tomorrow. You can stay here until the lease is up. I'll cover the rent. I yanked my hand back. Get out. Lena, get out. My voice cracked. Don't you dare pay for another minute of my life. I paid for yours. Every suit, every dinner, every lie you told yourself about who you are, I paid for it. Now get out before I remind you exactly how much you owe me. He didn't argue. He just grabbed his overnight bag and left. The door clicked shut, and the silence rushed back in. Thicker this time. I stood there for an hour, staring at the spot where he'd stood. I thought about the nights I'd stayed up massaging his temples when he had migraines from stress. I thought about the way he used to call me his lucky charm. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to Mrs. Gable's number. She was Julian's old nanny, the only person who'd ever shown him kindness when he was a kid. I had visited her in the nursing home last month. She'd held my hand and whispered, "You're too good for him. Girl, too good for all of this." I dialed. She picked up on the 3rd ring. "Hello, dear. It's late. He left me. Mrs. Gable," I whispered, the tears finally coming. "He chose her. Charlotte Sterling." There was a long pause. Then, her voice, raspy but firm. "I know. Child, I saw the papers. But listen to me. You aren't who you think you are. Your grandmother made me swear. But I can't watch you drown in that boy's mess anymore. You're a Thorne. Lena, Alexander Thorne's grandfather was your grandmother's brother. You were hidden after the kidnapping attempt when you were 3. Your name was wiped from the records to keep you safe." I froze. A Thorne? That's impossible. I grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment in Southie. My grandmother was a seamstress. She was a Thorne by birth. Mrs. Gable insisted. She changed her name to Hayes to protect you. Alexander Thorne has been searching for his cousin for 20 years. He's Julian's biggest rival for a reason. He hates that Julian steals from others to get ahead. He's been looking for you. Lena, I know he has. I hung up, my heart pounding. A Thorne? Alexander Thorne was the most powerful man in Boston. He was cold, ruthless, and Julian hated him with a passion I'd never understood. Julian had once told me Alexander had sabotaged his first big trade out of spite. I looked at the empty brownstone. Julian had taken his suits, his watches, his ego, but he'd left behind a stack of mail on the console table. I flipped through it: bills, magazines, and a thick cream envelope addressed to Julian Vance, care of Thorne Capital. I opened it. Inside was an invitation to Alexander Thorne's annual New Year's Eve gala. The note attached was handwritten, Julian. Enough with the games. Bring your lucky charm to the gala. I'd like to meet the woman who supposedly made you a man. If she's as impressive as you claim, perhaps I'll reconsider the acquisition. Julian had lied. Alexander Thorne didn't know about Charlotte. He thought I was still Julian's secret weapon, and Julian had planned to hide me away while he paraded Charlotte as his partner. I looked at the invitation. The Thorne family crest was embossed in gold. I thought about Mrs. Gable's words. I thought about Julian's betrayal. And then I thought about Alexander Thorne, the man who had, for years, exchanged anonymous letters with me through a literary journal, never knowing I was the L.H., who discussed philosophy and poetry with him. I'd always assumed he was some stuffy academic. I never dreamed he was him. I picked up the invitation and ran my finger over the crest. I wasn't going to hide. I wasn't going to be his dirty little secret. If I was a Thorne, it was time the world knew. And if Alexander Thorne wanted to meet Julian's lucky charm, I'd give him a performance he'd never forget. I dialed Mrs. Gable back. Tell me everything. Tell me how to prove who I am. Come by tomorrow. She said softly, I have your grandmother's locket, the one with the Thorne seal inside. And Lena, Alexander Thorne is a hard man, but he values blood. Show him the locket, and he'll protect you from that boy and his socialite whore. I hung up, a strange sense of calm washing over me. Julian wanted to play with the big fish? Fine. But he'd forgotten one thing. I wasn't just the bait. I was the hook. The Thorne mansion in Back Bay doesn't do anything by halves. It stands like a sentinel at the end of a cobblestone drive. All Gothic revival arches and leaded glass windows that probably cost more than the entire housing project I grew up in. I stood outside the wrought iron gates, the February air biting through the thin wool of my coat. I wasn't cold. I was numb. Numb from the fight with Julian. Numb from the revelations Mrs. Gable had dropped in my lap like a grenade. And numb from the sheer audacity of the cream-colored invitation burning a hole in my clutch. I'd sold my grandmother's Singer sewing machine, the one she'd used to put food on our table, to buy this dress. It was a deep emerald green, satin, with a neckline that hinted at the curves Julian used to praise before he decided they were common. It wasn't a designer label. It didn't have a price tag that screamed old money, but it was mine, paid for with my own sacrifice, not the crumbs Julian tossed my way after he started making 7 figures. The guard, a stoic man in a uniform that looked sharper than my future, checked his iPad. Elena Hayes, Mr. Thorne is expecting you. Expecting me, not as Julian's secret weapon, not as the girl he kept hidden in the South End. As me. My heart stuttered against my ribs. I forced my legs to move, walking past hedges trimmed into sharp, unforgiving angles. Every step echoed in the silence. I felt like an intruder, a ghost haunting a palace that should have been mine. Inside, the ballroom swallowed me whole. Crystal chandeliers dripped from the ceiling like frozen tears. The air smelled of white roses and expensive bourbon. Men in tuxedos that likely cost more than my annual salary mingled with women draped in diamonds that could fund a small country. And there, by the grand staircase, was Julian. He was holding a champagne flute like it was a scepter, his arm draped around Charlotte Sterling's waist. She was wearing a diamond necklace that caught the light and threw it back in sharp, cold shards. Julian looked uncomfortable, his eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal scanning for an exit. He hated crowds unless he was the center of attention. Tonight, he was just a prop. Then I saw him, Alexander Thorne. He was standing near the massive stone fireplace, a tumbler of amber liquid in his hand, listening to a senator with a kind of focused intensity that made the senator lean in, eager to please. He was taller than I'd imagined from his photographs, broad-shouldered, with a posture that spoke of absolute authority. His tuxedo fit like it had been painted onto him. His hair was dark, threaded with premature silver at the temples, and his eyes, even from across the room, I could see they were the color of a winter sky over the Charles River. Cold, distant, but terrifyingly intelligent. He looked up. His gaze swept the room, a king surveying his domain, and landed on me. For a second, the world tilted. Those eyes, I'd seen them before, not in person, but in the margins of the letters we'd exchanged for years through the Boston Review of Letters. L, H, and AT. We debated Kierkegaard's leap of faith and discussed the futility of wealth in the face of existential dread. I'd always pictured him as a rumpled professor in a tweed jacket, not this titan of industry. My breath caught in my throat. A.T. was Alexander Thorne, the man Julian hated more than anyone, the man who'd, according to Julian, sabotaged his first big trade out of sheer spite. Julian spotted me then. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost. He detached himself from Charlotte with a muttered excuse and stalked toward me, his smile strained and brittle. "Lena, what the hell are you doing here? I told you I'd handle the rent. I'd send for your things. I'm not here for the rent." "Julian," I said, my voice cutting through the low hum of conversation. It sounded steady. I was proud of that. "I'm here because I was invited." "Invited?" Charlotte glided over, her lips curling into a smirk that didn't reach her glacial blue eyes. She looked me up and down, her gaze lingering on my dress with undisguised disdain. "Darling, the help isn't usually invited to the gala, unless you're here to refresh drinks. I believe the kitchen is that way." She flicked a manicured finger toward a set of swinging doors. A few nearby guests chuckled into their champagne flutes. Julian shifted his weight, his jaw tightening. He didn't defend me. He never did when it counted. "Lena, please, this isn't the time or place for this little scene. We can discuss your situation tomorrow." "Situation?" I stepped closer to Charlotte, lowering my voice but ensuring it carried. "There's no situation. Ms. Sterling, I'm not the help. I'm the reason Julian has a situation to discuss. I'm the one who stayed up until 3 a.m. editing his thesis when he was too drunk to spell liquidity. I'm the one who dug through the archives at the Boston Public Library to find the shipping records that convinced your father to take a meeting with him. And I'm the one he conveniently forgot about the moment he saw your diamonds." Charlotte's smirk vanished, replaced by a flush of anger. "How dare you speak to me like that? Julian, control your associate." "Associate?" I laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "Is that what I am now, Julian? When I was proofreading your contracts and calming your nerves before presentations, was I just an associate then? Or was I only useful when I was invisible?" Julian stammered, his eyes wide with panic. "Lena, it's not. I didn't mean. Charlotte is more suited to this world. She understands the nuances of legacy. You're from Southie. You don't. I don't what? Julian?" I cut him off, my voice ringing with a clarity that silenced the nearby conversations. "I don't understand that legacy is built on lies, or that you're so ashamed of where you come from that you'd throw away the only person who ever saw past your own insecurities. She's telling the truth. A deep voice cut through the tension like a blade. Alexander Thorne stepped forward, his presence sucking the air from the room. He didn't raise his voice, but it carried the weight of a gavel. He looked at Julian, then at Charlotte, his expression unreadable. Julian, you claimed this woman was your silent partner, yet you introduce her to no one and allow your companion to insult her heritage? Explain yourself. Julian's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Mr. Thorne, sir, it's not what it seems. Lena is, she's from a different background. Charlotte is more aligned with the image I need to project for the merger. Lena understands. Don't you? Lena. He looked at me with pleading eyes. The same eyes he'd used when he'd forgotten our anniversary because he was networking with Charlotte. I felt a surge of pity, quickly followed by a cold, hard resolve. I understand perfectly. Julian, I understand that you're a coward. And I understand that I've wasted 3 years of my life propping up a man who's too busy looking in the mirror to see the foundation crumbling beneath his feet. Alexander's gaze shifted to me. It was intense, probing. He held out a hand. The locket. Elena. I'd almost forgotten I was holding it. The small, tarnished silver locket Mrs. Gable had pressed into my hand that afternoon. I placed it in his palm. He examined it, his thumb brushing over the intricate engraving on the front, a serpent eating its own tail. Encircling a sapphire, he popped it open. Inside, nestled against faded velvet, was the Thorne seal. The collective intake of breath from the surrounding crowd was audible. Alexander looked up, his winter sky eyes locking onto mine. My grandfather's seal, lost the night my cousin disappeared from her nursery. Mrs. Gable sent me a photograph of this locket last week. She told me where to find you. Julian stumbled back, his champagne flute slipping from his fingers to shatter on the marble floor. A thorn? Lena, you're a thorn? But you said you were an orphan. You said your grandmother was a seamstress. I am an orphan, I said, my voice echoing in the sudden, deafening silence. But I am also a thorn, hidden to protect me from the very people who would use me for status. People like you. Julian, you wanted a legacy? You married into one tonight. Congratulations. You've spent 3 years living off a thorn's intellect and calling it your own. Charlotte's face twisted in fury. She grabbed Julian's arm, her nails digging into his sleeve. This is absurd. Julian, tell them she's lying. She's some gold-digging paralegal from the projects. She's not lying, Alexander said, his voice a low growl that silenced Charlotte instantly. He handed the locket back to me, his fingers brushing mine for a fleeting second, a spark of connection in the frigid room. The DNA test results came in this afternoon. Elena Vivian Hayes is the granddaughter of Vivian Thorne. She is the rightful heir to the Thorne Trust. And as of this moment, Julian Vance, you are no longer welcome at Thorne Capital. Your employment is terminated, effective immediately. But the merger, Julian squeaked, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. The sterling deal. I'm essential. Essential? Alexander raised an eyebrow. You're a liability. Your work lacks the depth and insight found in the letters I've received from LH. Over the years, letters that, I now realize, were written by Elena. He turned his gaze back to me, and for a moment, the coldness in his eyes thawed, replaced by a look of profound recognition. The woman who argued that Nietzsche's abyss was a metaphor for societal indifference, not personal despair. The woman who described the scent of salt air in Southey as the smell of survival. That was you. I could only nod, my throat tight. He knew. He'd known it was me, or at least suspected, from the letters. And he'd orchestrated this. He'd invited me here, knowing Julian would bring Charlotte, knowing the confrontation would happen under his roof, on his terms. It wasn't cruelty. It was a surgical strike. He was removing Julian from my life with the same precision he used to dismantle rival companies. And you, Ms. Sterling, Alexander continued, turning his glacial gaze on Charlotte. Your family's attempts to acquire our shipping lanes through Julian's influence will be met with significant resistance. I suggest you and your father review the non-disclosure agreements Julian signed when he joined us. The penalties for breach are substantial. Charlotte's face cycled from red to white. She looked at Julian with naked contempt. You told me she was nothing. You said she was just some girl you were helping out. You incompetent fool. She shoved Julian hard. He stumbled, nearly falling into the remains of the champagne glass. Charlotte, wait. Julian reached for her, but she was already sweeping toward the exit, her diamond necklace flashing one last furious sparkle. Julian stood there, abandoned, in the center of the ballroom, the eyes of Boston's elite boring into him. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a desperation that might have moved me once. In another lifetime. Lena. I'm sorry. I didn't know. I didn't mean, if I'd known. I never would have. You never would have what? Julian? I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only he could hear. Never would have taken my money. Never would have let me edit your work. Never would have introduced me to your precious Charlotte as your equal. You didn't mean to hurt me. You just meant to climb the ladder. And I was just a rung you thought you could kick out from under you once you reached the top. The tragedy isn't that you hurt me. The tragedy is that you'll spend the rest of your life realizing you threw away the only real thing you ever had because you were too blinded by the illusion of people like Charlotte Sterling. Alexander moved to my side, placing a possessive, protective hand on my lower back. It was a shield, a declaration. The show is over. Vance, leave. Security will escort you out. Two burly men in dark suits appeared at Julian's elbows. He didn't resist. He just looked at me, his eyes hollow. I loved you, Lena, in the beginning. I did. No, I said softly. You loved what I could do for you. There's a difference. And I'm done being your solution. They led him away. The whispers started up again. A low buzz of speculation and excitement. Alexander ignored them. He guided me toward the center of the dance floor, where the orchestra was striking up a waltz. Dance with me, Elena. It wasn't a request. It was a statement. I let him pull me into his arms. His hand was firm at my waist, his other clasping mine. We moved in sync, a practiced, elegant rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. Around us, the crowd parted, giving us a wide berth. You handled that well, he murmured, his breath warm against my temple. Though I suspect Mrs. Gable omitted a few details, like the fact that your grandfather didn't just want to use you for power. He wanted to erase you. Your grandmother risked everything to hide you from him. I looked up at him, searching his face. Why didn't you tell me who you were? In the letters? Because I needed to know if you were like him. He said simply, or like your grandmother. I've spent 20 years cleaning up the mess my grandfather made. He was a cruel man. Elena, he valued power over people. I needed to know if the woman who wrote those letters, the woman who saw the world with such clarity and compassion, was the same woman who could be corrupted by a name. You aren't. You're like her. Strong, selfless, and far too good for a man who needs a legacy to feel worthy. We danced in silence for a moment, the music swelling around us. I could feel the eyes of the room on us, but with Alexander's arms around me, they felt miles away. What happens now? I asked. Now. He spun me gently, the emerald silk of my dress flaring out. Now, you stop hiding. You move into the East Wing. You meet the board. And you help me dismantle whatever is left of Julian Vance's career. But first, he leaned down, his lips brushing the shell of my ear. First, you tell me if the woman who wrote those letters is the same woman who just faced down a room of vultures without flinching. I met his gaze, seeing the man behind the myth, the reader behind the writer. She is. Good, he said. A rare, genuine smile touching his lips. Then we have a lot to discuss, starting with why you never signed your letters with your full name, and ending with how soon you'll agree to take your rightful place at my side. Not as a favor, Elena, as my partner, in every sense of the word. The music swelled to a crescendo. As Alexander led me through the steps, I realized I wasn't just dancing. I was stepping into a new life, one I'd never dared to imagine, one where I wasn't defined by the boy who left me, but by the man who'd been waiting for me all along. The girl from Southey was gone. Elena Thorne was just getting started. And as I looked into Alexander's eyes, I saw not just a rival, not just a protector, but a future I was finally ready to claim. The east wing of the Thorne mansion wasn't just a section of the house. It was a universe unto itself. Alexander had given me a suite that felt bigger than the entire Southey apartment I'd shared with Julian. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over a frozen Japanese garden, all raked gravel and skeletal pine trees dusted with snow. I stood there in my stocking feet. I'd kicked off the painful heels the moment the door clicked shut, staring at the locket in my palm. The silver felt warm, alive, like a heartbeat trapped in metal. A soft knock at the doorframe made me jump. Alexander stood there, leaning against the jamb. He'd shed the tuxedo jacket, loosened his tie, and rolled up the sleeves of his crisp white shirt, revealing forearms roped with muscle and a light dusting of dark hair. In his hands, he carried 2 mugs of coffee. The sight was so jarringly domestic, so at odds with the icy titan I'd met downstairs, that my breath caught. "You're up early," he said, his voice a low rumble that didn't echo in the vast room. He crossed the space and handed me a mug. The ceramic was warm against my cold fingers. "Couldn't sleep?" "Too much has happened," I admitted, taking a sip. It was black, no sugar, exactly how I drank it. He remembered. "I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, for Julian to call, for Charlotte to unleash a team of lawyers. But mostly, I keep wondering if this is real, if I'm real, or just some anomaly in a family tree." He walked to the fireplace, where flames were beginning to lick at a stack of birch logs, and gestured to the seating area. "Sit, please." He waited until I'd curled into the corner of a velvet settee before he spoke again. "It's real. The DNA test came back this morning. 99.9% match to your grandmother's mitochondrial DNA. You're Vivian Thorne's granddaughter, which makes you my second cousin, twice removed. But more importantly, it makes you the rightful heir to the Thorne Trust." I set the mug down on a polished rosewood table, my hands trembling. "Heir, Alexander, I'm not equipped for that. I'm a paralegal. I edit documents for a living. I don't manage billions. I don't understand the stock market or shipping lanes or whatever it is the Thornes do." "You managed Julian," he said, turning to face me fully. His gray eyes were intense, stripping away every layer of pretense. "You took a boy from a trailer park in Lowell, a boy who thought a balanced checkbook was a sign of genius, and turned him into a man who could fool the Sterlings into thinking he was a hedge fund prodigy. That requires more strategic acumen than half the CEOs on Wall Street possess. And you did it while surviving on ramen noodles and borrowed time. You have a mind for this. Elena, you just need to stop seeing yourself as the girl from Southey and start seeing yourself as the woman who rebuilt a man from the ground up." I looked away, focusing on the dancing flames. I didn't rebuild him. I enabled him. I made him believe he was something he's not. And when he found someone who could flatter that delusion better than I could, he left. He revealed his own inadequacy. Alexander corrected. He moved to sit in the armchair adjacent to the settee, bridging the physical gap between us. "Julian's failure was never your burden to bear. It was his inability to reconcile his roots with his ambition. He blamed you for his shame. I blame my grandfather for mine." I glanced back at him. "Your grandfather?" Mrs. Gable said he was difficult. "Difficult?" Alexander gave a short, bitter laugh. He was a monster. He destroyed my father, drove him into an early grave with impossible expectations and constant belittlement. Then he tried to mold me into his image. A shark, a predator. I spent my entire adolescence learning to hide my empathy because he called it weakness. But your letters. He paused, his gaze softening. Your letters were the only place I could admit I hated the man, that I hated the empire he was building on the backs of people he deemed expendable. You wrote about the quiet dignity of survival in Southey, about how a grandmother's sacrifice was worth more than a billionaire's yacht. You reminded me there was more to life than the next acquisition. I swallowed hard. You read my letters and thought of her? My grandmother? I read your letters and thought of you, he said, his voice dropping to a husky whisper. The woman who debated Nietzsche with a paralegal salary and a heart full of fire. I fell in love with L.H. long before I knew she was Elena Hayes. And when I saw you at the gala, when I realized the woman who'd kept me sane was the same woman Julian Vance was too blind to cherish, I wanted to break him. And I wanted to thank him for leading me to you. I don't love you, I said, the words rushing out before I could stop them. They hung in the air between us, fragile and true. Not yet. I loved Julian. For 3 years. I loved him. And he broke me. Alexander. He shattered me into so many pieces, I'm still not sure I found them all. Alexander didn't flinch. He didn't recoil. He simply nodded, his expression unwavering. I don't expect you to. Love isn't a transaction. Elena, it's not a debt you owe me because I have money or power. It's not a reward for surviving Julian's betrayal. It's a seed. It grows in its own time, like the moss on the garden stones. You can't force it. You can only nurture the conditions for it to thrive. I'm prepared to wait. I'm prepared to be the soil, the rain, the sunlight, or I'm prepared to simply be the man who stands beside you while you heal. Whatever you need. A knock at the door interrupted us. It was Mrs. Gable, leaning heavily on her mahogany cane, her face, etched with 1,000 wrinkles, softened when she saw me. Mr. Thorne, Miss Elena, forgive the intrusion, but Julian Vance is downstairs. He's demanding to see Elena. Alone. Alexander's jaw tightened, a muscle feathering in his cheek. I'll have security remove him. No, I said, standing up. My legs felt shaky, but my voice was steady. Let him come. I need to hear what he has to say. For closure. If I don't face him now, I'll be looking over my shoulder for the rest of my life. Alexander hesitated, his eyes searching mine. Then he gave a curt nod. 5 minutes, and I'll be right outside the door. If he raises his voice, if he so much as touches you, I'm in. Thank you, I whispered. Mrs. Gable patted my arm as she shuffled past. Be strong, child. He's a shadow. You're the dawn. Julian looked like hell had spat him out. His tuxedo was wrinkled, the bow tie hanging loose around his neck. His hair was a mess, and his eyes were red-rimmed, the lids puffy. He didn't look like the hedge fund prodigy who'd grace the pages of Boston Business Journal. He looked like the boy from Lowell, scared, insecure, and out of his depth. He paced the length of the sitting room, wringing his hands like they were wet rags. Lena, Jesus, Lena, can we talk? Please? His voice was hoarse, cracking on my name. I stepped aside, letting him in. I didn't offer him a seat. I remained by the fireplace, using the heat at my back as an anchor. You have 4 minutes. He stopped pacing, his eyes darting around the opulent room before landing on me. I saw the papers, the DNA test. You're a thorn. I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't know. If I'd known, if you'd known. What? I cut him off. You would have treated me better? You would have introduced me to Charlotte as your equal? You would have stopped letting her call me the help behind my back? Don't lie to me. Julian, not now. Not after everything. I was scared. Okay. He shouted, his voice bouncing off the high ceilings. He ran a hand through his greasy hair. Scared that you were too good for me. Scared that people would find out I was just some trailer trash who got lucky. Charlotte, she made me feel like I belonged. Like I wasn't a fraud. Like I was actually worthy of something. So you threw me away. I said, my voice dangerously soft. The woman who actually loved you. The woman who paid your rent, edited your lies, and held you when you cried after your father lost his job. You threw me away for a woman who sees you as a decorative accessory, a trophy to hang on her wall. I made a mistake, he pleaded, sinking onto the velvet settee I'd just vacated. He buried his face in his hands. A terrible, catastrophic mistake. But I can fix it. We can fix it. Marry me. Lena, we'll tell everyone the DNA test was contaminated. We'll go back to Southie. We'll start over. Just you and me, like it used to be. I laughed. It was a cold, hollow sound that startled even me. Start over? Go back? Julian, look at me. Really look at me. I'm not the same woman who cried herself to sleep because you forgot our anniversary. I'm not the woman who apologized for existing in your shadow. That woman is dead. You killed her the night you chose Charlotte Sterling's diamonds over my devotion. He looked up, his eyes wild. I'm nothing without you. Lena, don't you get it? Charlotte broke up with me last night. She called me a liability and a peasant. I have no job, no money, no one. Please come back. I'll be better. I'll be the man you always wanted me to be. I walked over to him, forcing him to look up at me. I cupped his face in my hands, not with affection, but with a clinical detachment, like a doctor examining a terminal patient. You're right. You're nothing without me, because I was the engine. Julian, I was the fuel. I was the one who gave you the illusion of flight. And now I'm taking it back. You want a legacy? Build your own. Stop stealing mine. Stop stealing from everyone. I dropped my hands and stepped back as Alexander opened the door. His presence filled the doorway, a dark silhouette against the brighter hallway. Time's up. Vance. Julian scrambled to his feet, his desperation turning to panic. He looked from me to Alexander, his chest heaving. You'll regret this. Lena, you'll regret choosing him over me. He'll use you, just like I did. He'll break you. And when he's done, he'll toss you aside like yesterday's news. You'll see. You're just a means to an end for him. No, I said, my voice ringing with a conviction I didn't know I possessed. I'll regret nothing, because for the first time in my life, I'm choosing myself, and I'm choosing someone who sees me, not as a charity case, not as a lucky charm, not as a stepping stone, but as an equal, as a partner, as a woman with a name and a history that predates yours. Alexander stepped forward, his hand landing on my shoulder. It was a brand of warmth and protection. Leave, Julian, before I have you escorted out by force. And if you ever contact Elena again, if you so much as speak her name in public, I will ensure that every hedge fund in New York, London, and Hong Kong knows you're a toxic asset. You'll be lucky to get a job managing a convenience store. Julian stumbled backward, his eyes wide with terror. He looked at me one last time, a mixture of hatred and longing on his face, before turning and shuffling out of the room. Alexander closed the door softly behind him, then turned to me. His composure cracked, just for a second, revealing the strain of the last 24 hours. Are you all right? He asked, his thumb brushing away a tear I hadn't realized had fallen. I nodded, leaning into his touch. The dam of emotions I'd been holding back since Julian walked out 3 nights ago finally broke. I collapsed against him, sobbing into the crisp cotton of his shirt. He wrapped his arms around me, one hand cradling the back of my head, holding me as I shook. He didn't shush me. He didn't tell me it would be okay. He just held me, absorbing my grief, my rage, my relief. When the sobs subsided to hiccups, he pulled back just enough to look into my eyes. He's gone, Elena, truly gone, and he's never coming back. I know, I whispered, And the terrifying part is, I don't miss him. I miss the girl I was when I loved him, but I don't miss him. Good, Alexander murmured, pressing a kiss to my forehead, because that girl deserved better. And so do you. You deserve a man who doesn't need you to be smaller so he can feel bigger. You deserve a man who celebrates your brilliance instead of fearing it. He led me to the settee, sitting beside me and pulling me into his side. We sat in silence for a long time, watching the fire. Outside, the snow began to fall again, blanketing the garden in white. It felt like a baptism, a cleansing. Tell me about her, I said eventually, my voice raw. My grandmother. Tell me who she really was. Alexander sighed. A heavy sound. Vivian Thorne was the most formidable woman I ever met. She had a spine of steel and a heart of gold. She saw what my grandfather was becoming, the greed, the cruelty, and she fought him at every turn. She started a foundation for unwed mothers, funded scholarships for inner-city kids, and secretly funneled money to families my grandfather had bankrupted. She was the conscience of this family, and when she discovered my grandfather's plan to use you, a toddler, to cement a merger with the Van der Biests by betrothing you to their heir, she took you and ran. She knew he'd stop at nothing to find you, so she erased every trace. She became Hayes. She became a seamstress. She gave up everything, her name, her fortune, her family to keep you safe. And my parents? I asked. The question I'd been too afraid to voice. Your mother was Vivian's youngest daughter. She died in a car accident when you were 2. Your father, he was a musician, a good man. By all accounts, he died with her. That's why Vivian hid you so completely. She was terrified my grandfather would declare you an orphan and seize custody. She'd already lost one child. She wasn't going to lose you. Tears streamed down my face again, but they were different this time. They were for the grandmother I'd known and loved, the woman who'd taught me to sew, who'd read me poetry, who'd held me when I cried, and for the woman she'd been forced to become. She never told me, not a word. She loved you too much to risk it. Alexander said, softly, Mrs. Gable told me Vivian's last words were about you. Keep her safe. Let her be ordinary. Let her be happy. She never wanted this life for you, Elena. She wanted you to have the peace she never had. I looked up at him, at the man who had unknowingly been my confidant for years, who had protected me without even knowing my name. And you? Why did you spend 20 years looking for me? Why not just let the Thorne name die with you? Because I owed her, he said simply, and because I owed myself the truth. I couldn't let my grandfather's legacy be the only story the world knew about the Thornes. I needed to find the other side, the side your grandmother represented. And somewhere along the way, I started looking for you because I needed to know there was still goodness in this family. Your letters, they were the proof. And now you're the proof. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, leather-bound journal. He placed it in my hands. This was hers. Mrs. Gable gave it to me after she identified you. Read the last entry. It's for you. My fingers trembled as I opened the journal. The handwriting was spidery but familiar, my grandmother's neat, precise script. I flipped to the last page, dated December 24th, 1998. My dearest Elena, if you are reading this, I am gone. Do not mourn me long. I hid you not because I was ashamed of who you are, but because I loved you too much to let this family destroy you. The Thornes are a poison. My darling, Alexander is different. He is the only one who saw through his grandfather's lies. He has a good heart, buried under layers of armor. Protect him, as I could not, and let him protect you. You are the only good thing left in this bloodline. Live a life I could only dream of. Be brave, be kind, and never, ever let them tell you who you are. All my love, forever and always. Gran. I broke. The sobs that tore through me were primal, ripping from a place of deep, aching loss and overwhelming gratitude. Alexander gathered me into his arms, rocking me gently, his chin resting on top of my head. He didn't say anything. He just let me cry until there were no tears left. When I finally quieted, he tilted my chin up, forcing me to meet his gaze. His eyes were suspiciously bright. She was right about you, Elena, and she was right about me. I was lost until you found me, first in your letters, and now you found me in person. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if you'll ever love me the way I've come to love you, but I swear to you, on your grandmother's memory, I will spend every day of the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me. I will be your shield, your partner, and your home. No more shadows, Elena, only light. He kissed me then. It wasn't the kiss of a man sealing a business deal or asserting dominance. It was a kiss of surrender, of promise, of a beginning. His lips were soft but firm, tasting of coffee and something uniquely him, sandalwood and smoke. I kissed him back, not out of obligation or gratitude, but because, for the first time in my life, I wanted to, because in his arms, I wasn't Elena the orphan, or Elena the paralegal, or even Elena the Thorn heiress. I was just Elena, and that was enough. When we broke apart, breathless, he rested his forehead against mine. Stay with me, Elena, not just tonight. Stay in this house, in this life. Let me court you properly. Let me show you what it means to be cherished. Okay, I whispered. Okay. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the scars of the old world and making way for the new. Julian Vance was a closed chapter. Charlotte Sterling was a cautionary tale. And I was finally ready to write my own story. One where the girl from Southey didn't just survive. She thrived, and she did it on her own terms, with a man who saw her not as a prize to be won, but as a soul to be cherished. The confession was over. The reckoning had begun. The Thorn Industries boardroom smelled like old money and lemon polish. It was a long, imposing space with a mahogany table that could seat 30, and it felt less like a room for making decisions and more like a tribunal. I sat at Alexander's right hand, my spine ramrod straight, clutching a pen like it was the only thing tethering me to the earth. Across from us, the board members looked like a gallery of portraits, men and women who'd known Alexander since he was a boy in short pants, all of them watching me with a mixture of clinical curiosity and thinly veiled skepticism. Alexander stood at the head of the table, his presence sucking the oxygen out of the room. He didn't need to raise his voice. The simple act of him settling his gaze on the group was enough to command silence. Gentlemen, ladies, he began, his tone clipped, authoritative, as you are all now aware. Elena Hayes has been definitively identified as the granddaughter of Vivian Thorn and the rightful heir to the Thorn Trust. Per the stipulations in my grandfather's will, stipulations he spent the last decade of his life trying to bury, she inherits the controlling interest in all Thorn family holdings. Effective immediately, a low murmur rippled through the room, like wind through dry leaves. At the far end of the table, Richard Sterling, Charlotte's uncle, a man with a face like a bulldog and a permanent sneer, leaned forward, steepling his fingers. Mr. Thorn, with all due respect, this is highly irregular. The woman has no verifiable experience in corporate management. She's a paralegal from South Boston. A background check reveals she's barely scraped together a middle-class existence. How can we, in good conscience, entrust the future of Thorn Industries, an empire built on generations of prudent stewardship, to someone with no pedigree, no track record, and no understanding of the global markets? Pedigree? Alexander's voice was a shard of ice. Richard, your niece's pedigree didn't stop her from losing $50 million in a failed tech venture last quarter. A venture, I might add, that Julian Vance spearheaded based on falsified data. Elena's pedigree includes turning that same trailer park boy into a hedge fund manager, a feat your niece couldn't accomplish with triple the resources and a Harvard MBA. I'd say Elena's qualifications are not only proven, but superior to the last candidate you were so eager to endorse. Richard flushed a mottled purple. Sinking back into his chair, Alexander didn't wait for a rebuttal. He turned his gaze on the rest of the board. Furthermore, effective immediately, Elena will be taking an active role in the company. She will oversee the restructuring of our philanthropic division, a division my grandfather systematically neglected, but one that aligns with the values Vivian Thorne instilled in her. And, as of this morning, she will be my wife. The room didn't just erupt, it detonated. Voices overlapped in a cacophony of shock and indignation. Richard Sterling shot to his feet, his chair scraping back with a shriek. Your wife? This is a blatant conflict of interest, a merger of assets disguised as a romantic entanglement. You're consolidating power, Alexander, and you're using this woman as a pawn. It's a unification of interests. Richard, Alexander corrected, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. Elena is a Thorne by blood, by law, and by the will of my grandfather. Marrying her ensures the stability of the trust and permanently neutralizes the very challenges you're attempting to mount. Or, he paused, his gray eyes narrowing with predatory focus. Would you prefer we revisit the ongoing investigation into Sterling Capital's offshore accounts? The SEC was most intrigued by the irregularities I forwarded them last week. I'm sure they'd find a thorough audit of your pedigree far more irregular than my marriage. Richard paled, collapsing back into his seat as if his strings had been cut. The other board members exchanged glances, nervous, calculating. Alexander had played his hand perfectly. He'd used my lineage to secure my position, then used our impending marriage to neuter the board's opposition. And he'd done it all while making it abundantly clear that crossing me meant crossing him, and crossing him meant financial ruin. After the meeting adjourned, the board members filing out in stiff, murmuring clumps, Alexander led me back to his private office. He poured 2 fingers of whiskey into heavy, cut crystal tumblers, handing one to me. I took a sip, the amber liquid burning a trail down my throat, steadying my nerves. You handled Richard well, he said, leaning against the edge of his massive mahogany desk. Though I suspect you enjoyed putting him in his place a bit too much. He deserved it, I said, setting the glass down. He raised Charlotte, he enabled her, and he's been trying to undermine you for years. He looked at me like I was dirt on his shoe. He looks at everyone that way, Alexander murmured. He reached out, tucking a stray strand of hair behind my ear. His touch was surprisingly gentle. But you're not dirt, Elena. You're the diamond buried in the rough. And now the world gets to see you shine. He paused, his expression sobering. However, marrying me isn't just a merger of assets. It's a target on your back. The Sterlings won't stop. Julian won't stop. And the board, they'll test you at every turn. They'll look for cracks in your armor, moments of hesitation. They'll try to provoke you, to see if you're truly a Thorne or just a girl playing dress-up. Are you prepared for that? For the loneliness of this life? For the constant scrutiny? I met his gaze, unflinching. I've been preparing for it since the night Julian walked out. I'm not the same woman who cried in an empty brownstone. Alexander, I'm a Thorne, and I don't run from fights. I finish them. I've lived with nothing. I've survived on nothing. I've had my heart broken by someone who claimed to love me. What more can they take from me that hasn't already been taken? And what more can I lose that I haven't already reclaimed? He stepped closer, his eyes searching mine, looking for any hint of doubt. I know. That's what terrifies me. You're too much like her, like your grandmother. She never backed down either. It's what got her killed. I froze. The whiskey turned to ice in my veins. Killed? Gran died of a heart attack. The doctor said, that's what the official report said. Alexander interrupted, his voice dropping to a low, somber tone. But Mrs. Gable told me the truth. Your grandfather found out where she was hiding you. He confronted her at her apartment in Southie. He demanded to know where you were. She refused. She told him she'd rather die than let him turn you into a commodity. He shoved her. She fell down the stairs. The coroner, a man indebted to the Thorns, ruled it an accident. But Mrs. Gable was there. She was in the kitchen, making tea. She saw it all. She was the one who called the ambulance. And she was the one your grandmother made swear to keep you hidden, no matter what. The room tilted. I gripped the edge of the desk, my knuckles white. My grandmother, my fierce, loving gran, hadn't just died. She'd been murdered. Murdered by the man who shared her blood. Murdered because she'd protected me. My grandfather killed her? Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because I didn't want to scare you, he said, his voice raw with a vulnerability that made my chest ache. And because I wanted to deal with him myself. I spent 20 years dismantling his empire from the inside out. I thought that would be enough. But Mrs. Gable told me the truth last week. He died 3 years ago. A stroke. The irony is, he never found you, but the damage was done. The family is still poisoned by his legacy. And now you're the antidote. But it means you're in danger. Real, tangible danger. The Sterlings, Julian, they're all symptoms of that poison. They'll come for you, Elena, not for money, not for power, but because you represent everything they're not: integrity, strength, and a heart that refuses to be corrupted. They'll try to break you because they can't control you. I reached up, cupping his face in my hands. His stubble was rough against my palms. Then let them come, because I'm not alone anymore. I have you, and I have Gran's memory, and I have the truth. Julian chose Charlotte because he was afraid of being nobody. I choose you because I'm proud to be somebody. Somebody who fights for what's right. Somebody who doesn't apologize for her existence. He pulled me into his arms, crushing me against his chest. I could hear the rapid thud of his heartbeat, a stark contrast to his usually controlled demeanor. Marry me, Elena, not because of the trust, not because of the board, not because of the name, but because you want to, because you see me, not as Alexander Thorn, the CEO, the titan, the rival, but as the man who's loved L.H. for 20 years, the man who's been waiting for you to find your way home. I tilted my head back, looking up into his winter sky eyes. They were stormy now, turbulent with emotion. Yes, I whispered, 1,000 times. Yes. He kissed me then, a searing, possessive kiss that tasted of whiskey and promises. It was a kiss that sealed a contract deeper than any prenuptial agreement, a bond forged in shared trauma and quiet understanding. When we broke apart, breathless, he rested his forehead against mine. I'll protect you, Elena, with my last breath. I'll burn the world down before I let anyone hurt you. I know, I said, believing it with every fiber of my being. And I'll protect you, too, from the ghosts of your grandfather, from the vultures on the board, from the loneliness you've carried for so long. A week later, the engagement was announced. The Boston Globe ran a front-page story, Thorn heiress returns. Set to marry CEO Alexander Thorn. The photograph showed us standing on the steps of the mansion, Alexander's hand resting protectively on my waist, my emerald engagement ring, a sapphire the color of my eyes, flanked by diamonds catching the light. Julian called me that night. I knew it was him. I'd programmed his new number into my phone just to ignore it. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. Then I listened. Lena, Elena, I saw the news. You're marrying him? After everything? I loved you. I still love you. I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. Don't do this. He'll destroy you. He'll use you and throw you away. Come back to me. I'll change. I'll be the man you want me to be. I deleted the message without a shred of remorse. Then I blocked the number. Alexander was in his study, reviewing contracts. I walked in and told him. He didn't say anything. He just stood up, pulled me into his arms, and held me. He's a ghost. Elena, Let him haunt his own mistakes. The next morning, Alexander took me to Gran's grave. It was a small plot in a modest cemetery in Southey, marked by a simple headstone, Mary Vivian Hayes, beloved grandmother. We stood in the biting wind, the locket warm in my palm. Alexander placed a single white rose on the grave. She'd be proud of you, he said softly, his breath misting in the cold air. She'd be proud of the woman you've become, of the way you've faced the storm, and she'd be proud of the way you've healed me. She'd be proud of you, too, I said, leaning into his solid warmth, for protecting me, for loving me, even when I didn't know who I was, even when I was just a voice in a letter. He kissed the top of my head. I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never forget who you are, who you've always been. And as we stood there, the wind howling around us, I knew he would, because Alexander Thorne didn't make promises lightly, and he never broke them. Julian had chosen the illusion of glory. Charlotte had chosen the illusion of power, but I had chosen the reality of love. And in the end, reality was the only thing that lasted. The proposal had been made, the alliance forged, and the reckoning was just beginning. The Thorne estate in Newport, Rhode Island, had been transformed, not into something softer. Alexander would never abide by that, but into something ancient, eternal. White roses, Gran's favorite, were tied with silk ribbons to the backs of every chair. The Atlantic crashed against the cliffs below, a rhythmic, primal heartbeat that seemed to underscore the solemnity of the occasion. It was a small wedding, by Thorne standards. Just family. Mrs. Gable, resplendent in lavender silk, had been wheeled in despite the doctor's protests, and a handful of Alexander's most trusted confidants. No Sterlings, no Julian. The absence of the latter felt like a physical weight lifted from the air. I stood in the bridal suite, looking out at the slate-gray ocean. My dress was silk, simple in its cut but heavy with significance. Alexander had commissioned it based on a sketch Gran had once tucked into her journal, a drawing of a dress she'd dreamed of wearing to my wedding, before she'd known she'd be hiding me from the world. It had long sleeves, a high neck, and a back that dipped low, held together by a single row of tiny pearl buttons. It was beautiful. It was mine, and it was a tribute. "You're trembling," Mrs. Gable said, her voice a dry rustle from the doorway. She was flanked by a nurse, but her eyes were sharp, clear, cold feet. "Child?" "No," I said, turning to her, just overwhelmed. "This is real, Mrs. Gable. This is actually happening. It's been happening for 20 years, she corrected, reaching out a gnarled hand. I took it, marveling at the fragility of the bones, the strength of the grip. Since the first letter you wrote to him, since the first time he read your words and felt less alone. The ceremony today is just the world catching up to a truth that's been written in the stars for a long time." She was right. I thought of the letters, stacked in a cedar box in Alexander's study, hundreds of them. Our arguments about Schopenhauer, our shared grief over Gran, our quiet hopes for a future neither of us could name. We'd built a cathedral of words long before we'd ever stood in the same room. The music started, not the traditional Wagner, but a piece Gran had loved, a somber cello sonata that spoke of endurance. I walked down the aisle on the arm of the estate's groundskeeper, an old man named Silas who'd known Gran. Alexander stood at the altar, waiting. He looked vulnerable. The ruthless CEO was gone, replaced by a man whose eyes held a world of emotion. When I reached him, he took my hands, his thumbs brushing over my knuckles with a reverence that brought tears to my eyes. "You're beautiful," he whispered. The words meant only for me. More beautiful than any letter could describe. More beautiful than any dream. "You're not so bad yourself," I whispered back, smiling through my tears. The vows were simple. Alexander promised to protect me, to cherish me, to never let me hide again. He promised to be my shield against the darkness of his family's past and my partner in building a new future. I promised to stand by him, to challenge him when he was wrong, to comfort him when he was weary, and to love him not for his name, but for the man he was beneath it. When the officiant, an old family friend and judge, pronounced us husband and wife, Alexander kissed me. It wasn't a performance for the guests. It was a claiming, a surrender, a homecoming. The world fell away until there was only the taste of him, the feel of his hands framing my face, the silent, thunderous beat of my own heart. The reception was held in the ballroom overlooking the sea. We danced. We ate, though I could barely swallow past the lump in my throat, and we laughed. Alexander, who rarely smiled in public, laughed freely, his head thrown back, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Mrs. Gable watched us from her chair, her face a map of quiet satisfaction. For a few hours, the ghosts of the Thorne legacy seemed to recede, held at bay by the sheer force of our joy. But peace, I was learning, was often a prelude to a storm. A commotion near the entrance drew every eye. Security, 2 men in dark suits, was holding someone back. A man in a rumpled tuxedo, his hair a mess, his face streaked with tears and grime. Julian. Alexander stiffened, his arm tightening around my waist. Ignore him, he murmured. He's not worth the air. But I placed a hand on his chest, stilling him. Let him in. Alexander, I want to see this. I need to see this. Alexander hesitated, his jaw tight. Then he gave a curt nod to the head of security. Escort him in, but keep your hands on him. If he moves toward my wife, restrain him. They brought Julian forward. He stumbled, his eyes wild, fixed on me with a desperate, feverish intensity. Lena, Elena, please. I just need to talk to you. One last time. Please. There's nothing left to say. Julian, I said, my voice carrying across the suddenly silent ballroom. Alexander shifted, positioning himself slightly in front of me. A human shield. You weren't invited. You lost that privilege the night you chose Charlotte over me. You lost it the night you let her call me the help. You lose it every time you open your mouth and prove you've learned nothing. I made a mistake. He screamed, his voice cracking. He struggled against the security guards, but they held him fast. I was stupid. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Please, take me back. I'll do anything. I'll grovel. I'll beg. I'll change my name. Just don't marry him. Don't choose him over me. Choose him over you? I stepped out from behind Alexander's protection, needing to face him myself, needing him to see me, truly see me, as I was now. Julian, you arrogant, blind fool. This was never a choice between you and Alexander. This was a choice between a lie and the truth, between a shadow and the sun. You offered me a life of pretense, of hiding, of constantly apologizing for who I was. Alexander offers me a life of truth, of being seen, of being valued for my mind, my heart, my soul. There is no comparison. You don't understand. Julian sobbed, sinking to his knees. The sight was pathetic, undignified. The man who'd once stood in this very room, preening before the board, was now a broken thing on the floor. She's mine. I made her. Without me, she's nothing. She's just some paralegal from Southey. I gave her everything. I gave her a life. No, Alexander said, his voice a whip crack of contempt. You gave her nothing. You took everything. You took her time, her money, her love, and her dignity, and she took it back. She built herself. Julian, not you, me. And now, she's building a life with a man who doesn't need her to be smaller, so he can feel bigger. That man is me, and you will never, so long as I draw breath, come within a mile of her again. Julian looked up at me, his eyes red-rimmed and pleading. Lena, I love you. I've always loved you. In the beginning, I did. No, I said, the word final, devoid of pity. You loved what I could do for you. You loved the way I made you feel, smart, capable, successful. You loved the idea of me as your silent partner. your secret weapon, your lucky charm. But you never loved me. Not the real me, the girl from Southie, the woman with a mind of her own, the heiress with a claim to a name you envied. You loved a reflection of your own ambition, and when that reflection tarnished, you threw it away. I turned to Alexander. Please, have him removed. I don't want him here. I don't want his shadow in my day. Alexander signaled the guards. They hauled Julian to his feet. He didn't resist now. He just hung between them, his strength gone. As they dragged him toward the exit, he found one last ounce of venom. You'll regret this. Both of you. The Sterlings will destroy you. Charlotte will. Charlotte is already destroyed. Alexander called after him, his voice echoing in the vaulted ceiling. Her family disowned her this morning. Seems they didn't appreciate her losing 50 million and alienating the Thorns. She's as much of a nobody as you are now. Julian, enjoy the club. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind him. The sound seemed to suck the remaining tension from the room. A collective exhale. Alexander turned to me, his face grim, but his eyes soft with concern. Are you all right? I nodded, leaning into his solid warmth. I'm perfect, because I'm with you, and because I finally realized I was never his to lose. I was always mine, and now I'm ours. He kissed the top of my head, a silent benediction. Always. Later, as the first stars pierced the twilight sky, Alexander led me to the balcony of our suite. The Atlantic roared below, a timeless, cleansing force. He pulled out a small, velvet box. Inside, nestled against dark blue silk, was a ring, not a diamond, a sapphire, deep and vivid, the exact color of my eyes. This was your grandmother's, he said, his voice rough with emotion. She wanted you to have it. Mrs. Gable gave it to me this afternoon. After the ceremony, she said Gran would have wanted you to wear it on your wedding night. As a reminder, I took the ring, slipping it onto my finger next to my wedding band. It fit perfectly. It's beautiful, like you, he murmured, turning me to face him. And Elena? There's something else. The board voted unanimously this afternoon, while we were dancing. They've named you co-CEO, effective Monday morning. They said if I'm going to be distracted by a wife, she might as well be competent enough to run the company. I laughed, a genuine, startled sound. I swatted his arm, but he caught my hand, bringing it to his lips. Distracted? Is that what I am? The best kind of distraction, he whispered, his eyes darkening with a look that made my breath catch. The kind that makes me want to be a better man. The kind that makes me want to burn the world down to keep you safe. The kind that makes me want to spend the rest of my life proving that you made the right choice. He kissed me then, a kiss that started soft and exploratory and deepened into something primal. Urgent. Real. It was a kiss that spoke of letters written in the dark, of grandmothers' sacrifices, of boardrooms and ballrooms and the quiet spaces in between. It was a kiss that sealed a lifetime of promises. When we finally broke apart, breathless, I rested my forehead against his. I love you, Alexander Thorn, not because you're a thorn, not because you're rich, not because you saved me, but because you saw me, because you read my words and knew my soul before you ever saw my face, because you waited for me, because you are my home, and I love you, Elena Thorn, he whispered back, his voice thick, my LH, my wife, my partner, my reckoning. You are the answer to every question I never dared to ask. We stood there for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, the sound of the ocean filling the silence. Below us, the waves crashed against the rocks, relentless, eternal. Above us, the stars burned, cold and distant, but constant. Julian was gone. Charlotte was gone. The Sterlings were a fading echo. The ghosts of the Thorn legacy had been laid to rest, and in their place was a future I'd never dared to dream, a future with a man who loved me for my mind, my heart, and my soul, A man who'd known me before he knew my name. A man who'd waited 20 years for me to find my way home. The next morning, the Boston Globe ran a follow-up story. Thornair wedding marred by ex-boyfriend's outburst. Sterling family disowns daughter. I didn't read it. I was too busy reading a new letter from Alexander. One he'd written that morning. Left on my pillow. My dearest Elena, for 20 years, I searched for you in letters. Today, I found you in a wedding ring. You are my beginning and my end, my past and my future, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me. You are the dawn that broke the longest night. You are the light that dispelled the deepest shadow. You are my heart, my home, my everything, yours, now and forever. A.T. I folded the letter, tucking it into the locket with Gran's picture and the new ring. Then I walked to the window, watching the sunrise over Newport. Julian had chosen the illusion of glory. Charlotte had chosen the illusion of power. But I had chosen the reality of love. And as I stood there, Alexander's arms wrapping around me from behind, I knew that reality was the only thing that ever truly mattered. The reckoning was over. The ghosts were silent. And I, Elena Thorne, was finally, irrevocably, home.